Hi, my name is Alicia Batia, and I am a current fourth year Global Studies major and Spanish minor at UC Santa Barbara. I've also been a member of Students Against Sexual Assault's nonprofit board for the past 2 years. Last year, I served as the publicity coordinator, and this year, I serve as the community coordinator. And I'm very, very excited to be here today and get to interview you. So, would you mind starting off with an introduction?
Yes, hello. My name is Deborah Williams. I am also a fourth year at UC Santa Barbara. I'm a political science major. Some things I'm involved in on campus. For the last 2 years, I've served on the exec board for the UCSB mock trial team. With being a team member for 3 years, I was a secretary, then I was the vice president. I'm also the lead political science peer advisor for UCSB's political science department, which is my major. I'm also a member of Phi Alpha Delta Pre-Law Fraternity and a member of BSU, Black Student Union. I'm also a legal intern at the Santa Barbara Public Defender's Office downtown, and I am an activist for sexual assault awareness and education.
So, as you know, this month is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So, I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about why you believe it's important to talk about sexual assault, sexual violence, and the culture that surrounds it.
Right. So I believe it's important to discuss sexual assault, first and foremost, as a young woman of color who is also a student at the moment. I think one of the main issues with sexual assault and how it's dealt with in our legal system is that true justice, isn't achieved for survivors. And you say justice and you think of it as some kind of nebulous, intangible, incorporeal concept, when in reality, there are tangible things that can happen and that, activists and legislators and community members can do in order to achieve justice, whether that's just providing resources, whether that's raising awareness, providing education, to survivors, to allies, and just really making an effort to change the culture, to change the narrative, and to put the focus back on the survivors and their stories and their needs, because the lack of justice, or the lack of focus on achieving justice in this arena, is so evident and apparent when we see certain things happening in our government and the way that they're handled in terms of sexual assault cases and accusations. It's just appalling to just watch it all play out, and at the end of the day, the survivor is exposed, they're not believed, they're not heard, and everyone kind of continues as normal until the next sensational, news headline comes out. So,
In what ways do you incorporate advocacy and activism for survivors of sexual assault in your own life, whether that be your personal life, your academic life, or your professional life?
so recently, a few months ago, actually, I had the privilege of delving into any topic that I chose for one of my major classes for political science. And we had to focus on an issue that was in our community because the class was on intergovernmental relations and local governance. And so I chose to focus on the local issue as well, also obviously as a state, national, global issue. But specifically for Isla Vista, I chose to focus on sexual assault, namely because it is something that isn't really talked about, honestly, in terms of, whether it's in social settings or educational ones. And I took it upon myself to not only um, research an issue that affects every single person in this community and that it happens all too often in this community, but also educate myself. And through educating myself and myself becoming more aware, I could therefore produce something to educate others. And so my research project ended up being, after editing, around 17 pages. And I had the privilege of interviewing SASA's very own current president and former president, now policy analyst, Emily Montalvo Telford, as well as Aaliyah Reynolds, and a slew of other extremely important figures that are in the research project. One of the interpersonal violence detectives, and even the assistant vice chancellor for UCSB, George Thurlow. And I found that was important because what I focused on in my paper was the nature of underreporting, and how it happens or why it happens. Is because what I focused on in the paper was that people didn't know how to report, but underreporting also is because people don't want to report. They don't want to report their cases of sexual assault, and that's a whole other topic that would require another 17 or more pages. But what I produced was focusing on, people not knowing how because of the relationships of the resources and organizations and entities we have at UC Santa Barbara, within Isla Vista, and at Santa Barbara, all need to work together to better produce resources and access points for survivors to get the help they need or the assistance they need if they want to file a case or not. They just want someone to talk to, anything having to do with advocacy, or people like allies and activists who want to get involved, who also want to know more and want to learn more, want to be a helping hand, want to be part of outreach. So that's why I thought it was really important to focus on that issue specifically.
Since you're a political science major, I'm very interested to know if you've noticed over the past 4 years if there are any connections or correlation between what you've been learning inside the classroom in your political science classes and the culture of sexual assault and sexual violence that exists outside the classroom.
That is a big question. In terms of my major specifically, contrary to popular belief, political science isn't really the study of current or modern real world politics. Depending obviously on your emphasis, that might be different if you're an American politics emphasis or an IR, international relations. I myself am political theory. So for me, that, talking about sexual violence in the classroom is just never really a thing. In the classes that I have taken that have more to do with comparative American or international politics, again, sexual violence, sexual assault isn't really something that we discuss. It's not really focused on current politics. It's about the theories behind modern politics and the way that governance is handled, is enacted, cooperation. It's really all theory based, honestly. So unfortunately, no, my major hasn't really provided me insight into any intersectionalities between the culture surrounding sexual violence outside the classroom and what I learned inside. However, that being said, that does not mean that sometimes when if we break off into groups and we're talking about some global issue or some political philosophy, that we don't talk about how, specifically women aren't talked about, they're not noticed, they're not given credit, they're always placed in a really kind of sexist, misogynistic, paternalistic light in terms of, how maybe attributing some virtues or qualities to them that might be seen as more effeminate, more submissive, more docile, more domestic. Again, those are just like really theories. So my major hasn't given me insight into that, but those conversations still happen about the role of women in politics, in governance within my major.
Often, when discussing sexual assault and sexual violence, the conversation can be rather difficult and heavy, and it's hard to remain positive and motivated. So, I was wondering, what are some of the things, people, actions, or anything else at all that give you hope for the future when discussing sexual assault and sexual violence?
Yeah, that's often the dilemma we're faced with when talking about real world issues, whether that be, sexual assault, whether that be racism, you know, xenophobic people, everything under the sun that puts, that others people, any type of othering or things that bring on subjugation or subjection of people unfairly. It's always hard to remain positive and motivated because change isn't going to happen like that. It's not going to happen in our lifetimes. But the actions and the things we can do now, which what makes me hopeful, does affect the generations in the future. And I think one of my biggest goals in life and something I'm extremely proud of that I've been able to do in certain ways is impact others and motivate them to change. the things that I do is kind of like a call to action for others. They want to pursue education and, in identity. They want to pursue education in, sexual assault awareness, because again, it can't be talked about enough. It can't be stressed enough. This is an issue that is going to always come up, and it's always going to be a problem if you don't address it head on. And every day we get stronger in our voice and in our conviction about, no, this is wrong. These are the institutions that perpetuate these cycles of sexual violence and sexual harassment, and then ultimately sexual assault, that we have to get rid of, that we have to change, that we have to deconstruct and reevaluate and bring into conversation anyone and anything that affects it. Every community, every person in power has a role to play in how change does or does not manifest. So, hope for the future for me is the future itself. It's those future generations, because that are going to come in and just really take this issue and this movement by the horns and just go with it. Because every year, every month, every day, you know, there's more support, and there's more allyship, and there's more education. And education, honestly, is one of the greatest social weapons that we have on our side. And I'm so grateful for that.
Thank you so much for being here today and allowing me to interview you. I admire you and all the work that you do, and I am genuinely so excited to see all that you accomplish in the future.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a joy to express my opinions and my thoughts on this issue that's near and dear to my heart. I'm so proud of all my colleagues, my peers, my friends who are part of this organization, who are part of this movement, who also consider themselves as allies and activists and educators and leaders in this. I applaud all of you, and I hope to do something like this again in the future.